introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your professional background, your academic background. You can tell us your favorite outdoor activity too. We always love to hear those. But just, yeah, introduce yourselves for our admitted students on the call. And first, let's go with Mark.
Hi, all. Welcome. Thank you, Catherine. I'm Mark Gasta. Nice to meet you. Really excited to work with each of you. I joked that I'm on my third career. First career, I was a military pilot, for an officer for 10 years, then moved into the business world. I was HR and sustainability executive. With that ending, my last role was the head of HR and the head of sustainability at Vail Resorts. And then I moved into academia. So I've been teaching now for a total of 5 years, started up in the Masters of Tourism Management program with Natalie, actually, teaching in the both the Adventure Tourism Certificate as well as the Ski Area Management program and the Masters Tourism Management program. And then I moved over to the Leeds School of Business and taught there for a couple of years. And then I found my home finally in MENV and ORE. I'm excited to be here. As far as the academic side, I have an undergrad in environmental science, followed by an MBA, followed by a doctorate in large-scale organizational change. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Mark. Next, let's hear from Autumn.
Hi, it's nice to meet you all. My name is Autumn Bernhardt. I'm the certificate lead for the Public Lands and Natural Resources Policy certificate within the Masters of Outdoor Recreation Economy. My background is actually in law. I practiced for about a decade. I worked for the Colorado Attorney General's offices, which in some ways is the largest law firm in the state of Colorado. It's where all the attorneys that work for the state congregate. There's a lot of us on different floors. And I worked in the Federal and Interstate Water Unit, enforcing interstate water compacts. Worked for a tribe also on natural resources. Clerked for a judge as well, so I still have a lot of kind of friends that are in the judiciary. So I've seen it from a lot of different angles. Did actually some lobbying work when I was working for the tribe, some legislative work as well. In terms of, and then the last 10 years have been pretty much academia, teaching environmental law and natural resources with an emphasis on environmental justice, and especially in this program, public lands, of course, which is, the basic infrastructure of outdoor recreation. In terms of outdoor recreation, historically, I did a lot of hunting and fishing with my family. Haven't done so much these last years, but, we would hunt elk, my extended family, sometimes deer, fished, fly fish, including in that. With folks getting older and changes in life, I've been doing more things like hiking with my friends that have a little tamer life and younger children as well. So,
thank you very much, Autumn. And finally, introduce yourself and your background, Natalie.
Thanks, Catherine. So my name's Natalie Ooi, and I'm the faculty lead for the Community Economic Development in the Outdoor Recreation Economy program. As you can probably tell from my accent, not originally from here, from Melbourne, Australia. And my undergraduate is actually in sport and outdoor recreation management, as well as a business degree focused on tourism management. And so that was really, my sort of introduction into sort of outdoor education, outdoor recreation. Like a lot of folks, I think, in this space, I've bounced around and tried a lot of different things. I did a lot of outdoor guiding in the early years. I worked in outdoor retail for a while. I worked in events. I worked at a backpacker hostel and did a lot of travel, did a lot of volunteering work around South America, but ultimately sort of found a home looking in sustainable tourism. So I came back and did my PhD, really looking at sustainable tourism, in particular focused on mountain resort communities and looking at some of the social and cultural issues that often come with tourism and outdoor recreation development, and the clashes we can have within industry that we see, across the US, but across the world as well. And that really sort of, got me into working a lot with the ski industry. As Mark mentioned, I spent some time up at Colorado State University and helped develop their graduate program in ski area management. Got the opportunity to work with a lot of great folks across the ski industry and also a lot of great communities as well. And headed up their Masters of Tourism Management program before coming to CU. And I'm really excited to be here and work in this space. What have I not answered? Outdoor activities. So favorite outdoor activities. If we look at the seasons, I do love to ski. I have 2 young boys and it's very exciting to watch them learn as well. There's a lot of candy, a lot of chocolate involved. A lot of cookies, a lot of hot chocolate as well. In the summer, I do like to hike. I love backpacking, haven't done it for a while, but I definitely love camping. It's something that I grew up with. And so I'm really keen on making sure that my kids have that same experience and those positive memories, because it's probably one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much to each of you for introducing yourselves. First major question of the faculty panel, what are the major themes and topics of your certificate? So tell us about what students might expect to explore in the coursework of your certificate. And for this one, let's start with Autumn.
Sure. Well, we focus on public lands, which where most recreation happens. Occasionally, you can hunt and fish on someone's private land if you have authorization, but really most recreation happens on public lands. So we explore like the major agencies that are responsible for administration of public lands: Bureau of Land Management, National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which deals with endangered species, the Forest Service as well. And then, of course, we kind of, like a lot of folks, bring their own experience coming there with states into classroom discussion. So a lot of times the coursework is somewhat dependent on who's in the class because you learn from each other. So we study those major federal agencies. We also study major federal laws like NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, right? A whole bunch of the kind of mainstay public land laws. The Antiquities Act is a huge one. We cover like what the mandates are of federal agencies, which is also related to legislative mandates, some of the critical cases and controversies and things like that. Just kind of like looking at it from what happened in the past, what's happening now. And it's pretty predictable what's going to happen in the future in some ways, because the history repeats itself with regards to public lands. It just looks a little different. There's more Gore-Tex involved as you keep going. But a lot of the controversies and players are still the same. So teach environmental stewardship and justice, a lot about environmental movements and how you change the law, how you advocate. And then, like I said, just that basic overview so you can be conversant and credible when talking about someone about public lands and how it relates to outdoor recreation.
Great, thank you, Autumn. How about Natalie?
So as I mentioned, I lead the community economic development in the outdoor recreation economy certificate. And it's probably a good place to start is probably explaining, what is community economic development, because it is a term that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So some of you might have heard of economic development or community development, but what we're really looking at when we're bringing these terms together is how do we build community? And in particular, what we're looking at is how do we build sustainable and resilient communities through outdoor recreation? And so some of the key focus areas are looking at how do we diversify local economies? How do we make sure that communities are culturally vibrant and they're socially connected and that people are civically engaged and can take ownership of their own future and participate in processes of development and investment that come, and the opportunities that might come to communities? How do we make sure that communities are also healthy and active, that have improved community quality of life, and that celebrate diversity through the outdoor recreation economy, but also just within the outdoors more broadly? And so I think a good way to look at it is how do we make these communities places where people want to live and where people want to visit? And let's look at the fundamentally important role that outdoor recreation plays within this. And I think it's a really exciting space to be in right now, just because there is this recognition of the true potential of the outdoor recreation economy, especially since the Bureau of Economic Analysis has started to measure just how many dollars are involved and how many jobs. When we talk about direct, indirect, and induced impacts, it really is significant, particularly in rural communities, which often don't have the same opportunities for, let's say, high tech, or even healthcare development that other larger cities can look towards in terms of, sources of jobs and revenue. And so we're looking at communities, whether they're communities that are looking to transition from, oil and gas and other extractive industries, looking for alternative ways forward. We're looking at communities, particularly urban communities, that are looking to become more resilient and sustainable, and how can outdoor recreation play a role there? We're looking at communities that are revitalizing maybe their downtowns, or maybe particular neighborhoods that have, long been neglected, and what role can outdoor recreation play there? As well as looking at established tourism destinations. And the conversation there is often very different. It's how do we manage visitors? How do we market or demarket a destination in some instances to make sure that we're not overusing the resources, and that also that we're making these places livable, that we have things like affordable housing, so that, the reasons why people came to these places still exist. And how can we create a more sustainable future for those areas? So I would sort of quickly break down the 4 key areas that this certificate looks at is looking first at what is community and why it is important, and how do we create those, boundaries of who is included and who is excluded, and why does that matter? Then we look at what are some of the strategies in which we can build community through outdoor recreation. And then we look at some of the various tools that exist that allow us to do this, whether it's, grants, whether it's certain programs, whether it's accelerators and incubators to help, startups in this space. We also look at then building community capacity. So one of the key differentiators between community development and economic development is it's not just about bringing economic opportunity to communities, it's making sure that in that process, we're also building the capacity of local residents to really take charge of their future. And so those are probably the 4 main areas that we cover.
Great. Thank you very much, Natalie. And finally, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So my certificate that I oversee and lead is called Leading a Sustainable Business in the Outdoor Recreation Economy. It's all right there in the title, right? It's about business, it's about leadership, and it's about sustainability. I mean, bottom line, it's about how do we build organizations that can do both well financially and good for all of its key stakeholders, right? For its employees, for its consumers, for the investors or shareholders, for the communities, for the environment. How do you look at your business systemically, holistically, and build something that truly sustains over time, and the high tide then raises all boats, right? So in the breadth and depth of the content, there we'll talk about everything from the circular economy to sustainable supply chain to strategic leadership, to mission, vision, values. How do you get alignment within your organization? All just examples, to entrepreneurship and how do you build a business from the ground up. So bottom line is you'll be exposed to all business aspects of the outdoor recreation economy, from the different types of businesses to the functions within the businesses and the unique challenges and opportunities that the industry faces. So what I'm passionate about is how do we leverage the outdoor recreation economy as a powerful economic development tool and an avenue to help alleviate poverty and protect and preserve wild places and threatened cultures. So that's an overview of the Leading a Sustainable Business in the ORE certificate.
Thank you very much, Mark, and all 3 of you for talking a little bit about your certificate and what students can expect. Our next question for the panel: what types of career opportunities might your certificate prepare students for? And we will reverse the order on that one and start with Mark.
Great. Natalie always gives me a hard time because I tend to steal everybody's thunder on this one, because, I'll start and just say, look, it depends on your experience, your education, and your interests. And there's so many different pathways to potentially take this education and apply that to the industry. So there are corporate roles. A lot of folks, I come out of the corporate environment and had a sustainability role there. There's a lot of folks are interested in those types of corporate roles. There are obviously industry associations like the OIA, the Outdoor Industry Association, the ATTA. There are government types of roles, right? We have people involved with and have guest lectures from the state outdoor recreation offices. Ben mentioned earlier, a lot of folks are interested in nonprofit work, right? From big city mountaineers to Leave No Trace. There's entrepreneurs. Some are interested in starting up a guide service, or a nonprofit for one of my students is working on getting cancer survivors outdoors as part of their healing process. Obviously, retail is a big part of the outdoor recreation economy. Think VF Corp, Patagonia. There's education. Some folks, as we heard from Kirsten earlier, some folks are really interested in leadership roles in organizations like Outward Bound or Knowles. So, and then finally, I'll say sustainability consultants. Some are interested in working with organizations to help them with some of these challenges they're faced with as it relates to sustainability. So it all depends on your interests, your passions, and how you want to take your education. And when we give advice later, I know Catherine's going to ask us to talk about that, applying all your time and energy and focus so that your projects and your industry interviews you may be asked to do and things like that are all taking you in that desired direction.
That is great. Thank you, Mark. Always a pleasure to have you steal the thunder from everyone else with your very comprehensive description of careers in the outdoor industry. Next, let's go to Natalie.
I feel like I always follow Mark after this question. As you mentioned, I would say there are many and diverse career opportunities within the community economic development space, particularly as it relates to outdoor recreation. Again, I would say across all sectors. If we look at public sector, obviously there's a lot of opportunities in local government, even at a regional level. If we're looking at community economic development or economic development offices that exist, Colorado, for example, has, divided itself into regions, and they have regional offices that work in this space. We even have cities that have their own director of outdoor recreation. And a lot of those roles are very much focused on how do we bring outdoor industry to these communities? How do we build trails in a way that leverages our main street, our downtown? How do we make sure that we're conserving and protecting our public lands and that we're working really closely with the different agencies so that things like parking and traffic congestion are all addressed, so that there's a great not only visitor experience, but resident experience as well. At the state and government level, there's even more opportunity. Within Colorado, and because you're both within Colorado, I'll use that specific example. We have the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, within which the state OREC or Outdoor Recreation Office sits. But there's also an Office of Rural Development. There's the Colorado Tourism Office. There's a lot of different departments and programs that students, are often interested in being a part of or helping to manage, that work directly with different communities or small businesses across the state, that's focused on rural opportunity, that's focused on economic development, and that's focused on outdoor recreation. In the private sector, I think more and more outdoor companies are also starting to recognize the importance of having strong community relationships. So we're starting to see, some of the larger corporations, for example, that Mark mentioned, your Patagonias, your VF Corp, a lot of them now have these kind of community engagement positions, or maybe it's a foundation director. North Face has the Explore Fund, REI has a number of different funds, and they're looking for folks who can build have really great stakeholder engagement at the community level, so that they know where best to direct some of these funding opportunities to really elevate outdoor recreation at that local level and bring more and more people into the outdoors. In the nonprofit realm, there's also a lot of opportunity. We have, depending on the community, whether it's public or nonprofit, but you have things like Chamber of Commerce, local destination marketing or management organizations, conservation nonprofits, and land trusts. There's a lot of work that's done in this space that's relevant to outdoor recreation, that's relevant to community building, and even, community development financing institutions, at that local level. Other microfinancing options are increasingly playing a large role in elevating small businesses that are specific to the outdoor recreation economy.
Great. Thank you very much, Natalie. And finally, some career opportunities available from your certificate, Autumn.
That was pretty exhaustive list, really, from from both Natalie and Mark. I appreciate that. I mean, just even today, like I had a job come across like my desk that had to do with a Latino community organizer for a wilderness association. And so that's emerging. Had one from a government entity related to environmental quality. So that's more of a compliance planning type of job. And that was just today. So, you know, who knows what tomorrow is going to hold. But generally they fall into the private sector, the public sector, which is government, and then nonprofits as well. And then of course, business. And business is really leaning toward strongly, like if you've seen like any of like the videos that a lot of outdoor companies are putting out, they're related to environmental justice and public engagement. You can see that with Patagonia's involvement in a lot of public land protection. So you know, it's emerging. I mean, even being able to be in the arts and which really is what videography is. There's a place in outdoor recreation and public lands.
Absolutely. Thanks again to each of you. Next question. Tell us a little bit about the student experience in the certificate you lead. So maybe, for example, the types of guest lectures that you have, or the types of assignments that students complete in the coursework in your certificate. Let's start with Natalie.
Yeah, so you know, I'm assuming everyone's familiar with the format in terms of the 4 asynchronous content courses followed by the project course at the end. I'll talk first about those asynchronous courses. You know, I have a lot of content in a lot of these courses that come from industry. So a lot of industry interviews, and those are the guest lectures that Catherine's referring to, and they'll feature a range of folks from, you know, the state OREC, you know, office to other federal program directors, looking at some local nonprofits and even coalitions, whether they're business alliances or conservation alliances, that are talking about, you know, one example is the Pikes Peak Outdoor Recreation Alliance within the Pikes Peak region in Colorado Springs and around. They're really active, you know, outdoor recreation specific business alliance. And so we bring representatives like that into the classroom to talk about their own experiences, to talk about, you know, the importance of this area and best practice and some of the lessons they've learned when we're talking about things like collaborations and partnerships, community engagement. We have folks from city and county government, whether it's looking at planning and parks and rec and open space. We have also outdoor business owners who talk about it from their perspective of, you know, what is it like to work with the city sometimes, you know, or how they're often in the role, particularly in rural communities, as community leaders and champions who are the ones who really sort of wave the flag for the outdoor recreation industry and highlight it as something that their communities should be focusing on attracting. And then also a lot of volunteers work in this space. A lot of people at the community level who are just passionate community residents and champions. And they're often, you know, the ones who bear the brunt of the work, but really fly the flag and get things like community visioning efforts off the ground, which then pave the way and create those action plans that lead to, you know, more focused investment and implementation of projects that really strategically look at developing outdoor recreation. I would say in terms of, you know, assignments, everything we try and do, we try to make it as applied as possible. So, you know, in some of the introductory courses where it is a little bit more looking at, you know, what are the ideas and notions of community, you might be tasked with, you know, doing a community description or profile. So analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of existing communities, where there are opportunities and where there are gaps, and coming up with recommendations. You might be, you know, tasked with, you know, attending a public meeting and analyzing what stakeholder engagement and power disparities look like and how that plays out in terms of, you know, how institutions and organizations engage with the general public. You might be tasked with doing a policy memo as it relates to one of the, you know, things like the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, and what that's going to look like as it trickles down to the communities and what some opportunities exist for communities. Maybe coming up with a stakeholder engagement plan on how you would engage a community and their residents and, you know, outside partners as they work through a redevelopment process as it relates to outdoor recreation. So those are just a handful of examples. I think I answered the question, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a great answer. Thank you, Natalie. Next, let's go to Autumn for the student experience in your certificate, including maybe guest lectures, assignments, and so on.
Yeah, I'll probably take the more literal approach to that one because that leaves a little bit to supplement what Natalie already said. But you have, for my class, you have discussions every single week. It's a 7-week compressed course. I have 2 major assigned research projects that comes kind of halfway through and at the end. Most of my students, just in terms of like the demographics, tend to be working professionals or have had some experience, at least maybe not outdoor rec, but public lands or something. So there's been some tie, even if they're just even connected to outdoor rec by enjoying it and they want to make a transition in their career. What ends up, you really get to know your classmates really in the discussion. It's much more social than you would think, and you really do learn from each other. I had an environmental justice and stewardship class. I had about a third of them were actually law students. 2/3 of the students came from government work, very, very dedicated outdoor recreation. So they're actually looking to promote their career. And because, I'm teaching natural resources policy, they all engage with each other. Some even had like a scientific background. And so like those assignments are really like they're experiential. They get into some very good discussions online, and you get into good discussions with people that have expertise beyond yourself. So you're learning the course material, you're reading and watching it, you're engaging with people that have a little bit different perspective, like, well, have you considered this, or can we resolve this policy dispute this way? This is what worked in California. What do you think? Do you think that would work in Connecticut, or is it different? Is the climate, is the ecology different? So that's really it. It's pretty standard. I think sometimes with working students, sometimes they get so the papers come up and they're like, oh my goodness, I got a paper. But as long as you're gonna know it's coming down the road, the discussions really build, so you're prepared for the paper. So in a lot of ways, like, and you have like at least in my class, I give a little bit of discretion. So usually within a framework, you get to choose kind of an assignment within a framework. Does that make sense? Like collaborative interagency management of wildlife, or the connection between environmental justice and outdoor recreation economy, but you get to pick. So sometimes that's helpful in encouraging students to be more passionate about what they're researching. And then it's the same thing with your discussion posts, is that, like a lot of times, you just bring that experience in, and that's part of the classroom, is learning from each other and other people that are either have experience in outdoor rec and public lands, or are so engaged with it that even if they don't have professional experience, they have some type of deep passion. And I think at the end of the class, everyone comes out a bit richer, including me.
Absolutely. Great answer. Thank you, Autumn. And finally, a little bit about the student experience, Mark.
My colleagues did such a great job that I get off easy here. I mean, largely structured the same way, right? With a couple major assignments and regular discussion posts where we learn from one another. I'll just reiterate a couple points, very practical, very applied. We attempt to bring the industry to you. So there'll be lots of guest speakers, too numerous to list, but everything from, vice president of sustainability for a very large public corporation to CEO of a guide service that happens to be on Everest right now, right? To diversity, equity, inclusion, justice leaders in the industry trying to help with inclusion, to experts on the ORE consumer experience and talking about what are their motivations and how do we speak to them, and how do we can think about them in terms of what their wants and needs are. We hear from companies that are public, private, large, small, for-profit, not-for-profit, industry associations, you name it. And we really help you try to make those connections. So Autumn spoke very well about, and I couldn't agree more about the connectivity of the students. Well, we also try to help you make those connections with industry not only through these guest lectures, but things like other assignments might be industry interviews on key topics and things like that. So you actually get some face-to-face time as well. So I'll stop there instead of reiterating more.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to hear from all three of you again on that topic. And that brings us to our last question of the faculty panel before we give our admitted students who are here on the call the opportunity to ask some questions as well. But what is your number one piece of advice for students as they begin this program? Natalie.
Kind of twofold, but related, right? I would say, I mean, with the online learning environment, obviously it's very self-directed. And so the content is all loaded and provided there. So there is a degree of time management. My biggest piece of advice would be to always look ahead, because as Autumn mentioned, 7 weeks can go by very, very quickly. And so we're really, the sort of adjoining piece there is also don't stress. We understand, as Autumn also mentioned, that a large number of our students are working professionals and they're studying, in between, feeding kids and spending time just as a family or going outside. We don't want to stop you from being outdoors as well. And so the time management piece is key, but don't stress in that we're really flexible. We understand what it's like to be balancing work and study and life. And so there is a lot of grace, especially if there's a lot of upfront communication and sort of recognition that, hey, in 2 weeks, I'm not going to be able to get that assignment in, on Friday midnight because I have this coming up at work. And so do you mind if I can get an extension until Sunday? We're pretty great with that kind of thing because, again, we know the realities of juggling so many things. So it's often one of the fears I hear about students coming into the program is, I haven't been in school for a while. I'm a lot busier now than I used to be. How do I manage it all? And the thing I would like to say there is you can do it. It definitely does take some organization, but also don't ever hesitate to reach out and be like, how can you assist me in this process?
Absolutely. Thank you, Natalie. What's your one piece of advice, Mark?
I have lots of them, but I'll just give you one. And I kind of mentioned it earlier, right? Part of this program is discovery, right? Sometimes we just don't know what we don't know, and we find new pathways that were unexpected. But once we kind of get clear on those pathways, begin to do all your projects, do all your discussion posts, begin to do your industry interviews, begin to do your research so that you really begin creating a body of knowledge that you can market to employers, right? Hey, I really want to play in this space. I've done these projects. I've worked with these teams. I have this knowledge. I have this expertise. And now you can begin to sell that. And ideally, it's building on some of the experiences you already have, which now just bolsters that by having that experience now applied to the industry piece as well. So that's
Great.
one. Yeah,
that's great advice. And finally, one piece of advice for students as they get started, Autumn.
Oh, a lot was covered. So I definitely agree with the time management piece for certain. I mean, it is grad school, particularly you're pursuing the master's. So that's key. And everything's laid out in the beginning. So you're going to know that. It's just you're going to have to take something off the plate to put this on the plate. So you're not overwhelmed and you can enjoy the experience because it really is a good experience. I have some switch up in my classes, even within my certificate. Like I mentioned, that one class I had like a third law students, but I also have students that are getting the public lands and natural resources policy certificate, and so they've had several classes with each other, and they have rapport with each other, and there's a lot of exchange, and so you get to carry like a lot of the conversations from class to class to class, having that dedicated group within the certificate. And so I would say just kind of be open-minded because, you're like I mentioned this before, you're going to learn things from not just the readings, but from each other. And I didn't realize that. And that's usually what the students say. I didn't realize that. I want to learn more about that. What about that? Can that apply to me where I want to be in my profession or what I want to study? And so, just open yourself up to the opportunity, but time management helps with that.